This is going to be way shorter because I like being at the pub sooner, and way less technical. Okay, so something that's been floating my boat recently is the idea of data-driven storytelling, and it's a bit of an ambiguous sort of title, I guess, so I'll go through a bit of explanation about that. But the idea is essentially that I want to convince web designers and web developers that they should be better at telling stories, and we're already generally pretty good at data, so let's use data as a basis for our storytelling and see what it does. It can actually make big changes. So if you think about the way data generally gets presented on the web, there are a heap of different ways, but two models that are pretty common are the exploration model or the narrative model. And I'm going to talk about the narrative model because narrative is storytelling, but we need to compare them just to get a bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. So the exploration model is comprehensive. A great example of the exploration model, the only one I'm going to give is Google Analytics. So everybody use Google Analytics, right? So the whole lot is there. All the data is there. You can slice and dice it in 100,000 different ways. You know, the number of views you can actually get of that data are exponential. It's completely unbiased. It's not trying to convince you of one thing or another. You actually have to go in and look at it and slice it your own way to form a view of what it's trying to tell you. The user has to be really active, right? You've got to get right in there and think about it. And it's overwhelming if you've never seen that kind of thing before. And you compare that to a narrative-driven thing, or you know, data that's presented in a narrative way. The data is limited. You know, you might have this whole cache of data like in Google Analytics, but if you're telling a story with it, then you're only going to see a thin slice of it. And storytelling is linear as well. It moves from one thing to the next. And it's agenda-driven. It's not unbiased. It's usually trying to tell you something, trying to convince you. The user can be passive, so they don't actually have to spend a lot of time thinking about what, you know, where to get the data, where they should go next. It's all just laid out for you. And the response, rather than being overwhelmed, hopefully, if you're telling a good story, is people are interested. So rather than go down the left-hand side where there's nothing, we'll go down the right-hand side where there's examples. Has anyone seen this graphic before? It's a bad rendering of it, I'm sorry, but anyone? No one? Yeah, okay, good, a few people. Okay, so this is one of the most famous infographics of all time. It depicts Napoleon's defeat in 1812 when he tried to take on the Russians, and it's put together by this guy named Charles Joseph Minard. He's a French, I don't know, I guess he's a designer, or he was. So I'm just going to go through a few examples, not to really teach you anything, but just to give you an idea of the kind of things that you can do when you start presenting data in a narrative form and telling a story with it, rather than just dumping it out there. And the first thing you can do is you can provide a heap of detail at a glance. This single graphic provides something like 7 or 8 different series or points of data for Napoleon's attempted conquest. It provides things like the numbers of troops, so the fatness of the line is the number of troops in his army. It provides important geographical details like border crossings and river crossings. Provides place names, so we know where we are. It provides distance scale, so we know how far they've travelled. Yeah, so I've already said this one, but that's a river. That's a really important part of the journey, and it's just depicted easily. Provides temperature, provides time, as in date. You know, this is the 9th of What's that? Something? I don't know French, I'm afraid. So yeah, you can pack a real punch, right? There's so much data packed in there, but you still immediately get the idea. As soon as you know things like the width of the line represents how many people in his army, you know that it's dwindling. The whole conquest, his army's dwindling. And you can see the end of the line where he has to turn around and the army's still dwindling. So right at a glance, you're getting like a fair bit of detail, but then you just like look a bit closer and there's so much detail. It's incredible just in this one graphic, and it tells a great narrative. Like it's a compelling story, right? One of the other things you can do when you tell stories with data is you can expose the opaque. By that I mean, you know, you could think about it with Google Analytics, right? It's really opaque. Like trying to find the story about what's popular and what's not is pretty easy because it's got a list of like top pages, right? But then you want to find out a bit more detail. You've actually got to do a fair bit of work. A great example of this, has anybody watched any videos by Hans Rosling? Yeah, like a few of you. So he's a great presenter. Like he tells a great story, a fantastic story. He does a lot of work around poverty and economics. So he looks at the health of people and their relative levels of wealth. I don't know whether this will play as I want it to. Doesn't look like it. Well, we don't have sound anyway, so I'm going to skip that. So basically he tells a story where you see in the bottom left hand corner of the chart all these nations. Each bubble has a size and it represents a nation, and you can see over time it plays a story of time where the nations get richer and the population gets more healthy, and that's a narrative that wouldn't be presented in just in an exploratory view of data, and it tells a real story. It exposes the opaque. You wouldn't know the facts you know if it wasn't presented in a narrative manner. The other thing that's really great about storytelling is that you can be really compelling, and a compelling story that's just compelling on its own is only made more compelling, so much more compelling when it's backed by data, because it gives people the feeling that it's real. And the best example I can find of this is Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth speech. I don't know whether you've all seen it, but you know, he tells the story of carbon in the atmosphere over time, and then all of a sudden, like going along through time, all of a sudden it's you know, off the top of the charts, and he does a good presentation of it. But that wouldn't be compelling without the data, and if you were just looking at the data in a spreadsheet, you wouldn't get that narrative. It wouldn't be compelling at all. And the other thing you can do, another thing you can do is you can be quiet. You know, those last examples I gave are really like robust, like big examples. You know, Al Gore gets up on a big stage, and you know, Hans Rosling is like the biggest professor in the world. But I really like a quiet story as well, and one of the great things about quiet stories is they can be short, and I love a good short story because I don't have to work too hard for it. And when it's backed by data, like this is a real story, this is from my life, some of you might have seen me talk about this before. That's real. When I leave Left, Right and Centre, which is where I work, there's a 17% chance I'm going to get sushi for lunch. And I know that for sure. It's backed by data, and that tells a story. And it's quiet, but I think it's interesting because it's backed by data. So, to remind us where we are, we've looked at narrative, the other options is exploration, and like any good video game, the real knockout isn't like a single punch, it's when you get into a combo, right? So if you can do both of them at once, it's even better, I think. There aren't a great deal of examples where this is done well, I don't think, or not that I've seen. If you know any, please come up and tell me afterwards. But wouldn't it be great if you could tell a story, or you could hear a story that's data-driven, but then a particular part of the story that's interesting to you and might not be interesting to anyone else, you can actually drill in and find the real detail there. And so the best example I can find of this is Rebecca Black. It's the Google Zeitgeist. This is 2011. So if you haven't seen the Google Zeitgeist, Google it, look it up. It's great. They tell the story of the year, the search story of the year. This tells everything about 2011 that's popular or interesting. And it's all backed by data. It's a data-driven story. And then while you're reading the story, while you're going through the top 10 searches of the year, you can drill in, and on the right-hand side here you can see more detail about it. So she's nothing and no one until about August or whenever that is, and then all of a sudden she's someone. And if you click into that further, you can slice and dice the data in different ways, in similar ways that is similar to what you would do in Google Analytics, and it becomes even more interesting. So do say hello afterwards or there. Thank you.